Hello, lifters, and welcome to episode number 12 of Raising the Bar. Today, we are going to be talking about the art and science behind picking your meet attempts. So, when you are prepping for your powerlifting meet and you're going into your meet, you need to figure out what your goal for that meet is. Your goal may not be to get a PR. Your goal may not be to get best lifter. Depending on the athlete, your goal can be a couple different things. If you are going after a state record, you're really only going to need to hit whatever that state record is. If that state record is below what you've attempted at the gym, you don't even need to max out. If you are trying to win first in your weight class, you need to be very strategic about the attempts that you pick, specifically those third attempts, in order to stay ahead of the other competitors that are within that class. If you need to get a national qualifying total, all you need to do is hit whatever that total requirement is. You don't need to worry about being the best lifter or getting first place. But you need to make sure that you have those goals set before you start to plan your attempts. Otherwise, you can either fall short if you're not strategically planning for a state record or a national total. And also, if you are trying to hit that first place within your weight class, you need to know what the other lifters have lifted in the past. And you can look that up through the federation's lifting records to see what their totals were at previous meets. That way you can kind of get an idea of what you can expect from the competition going into this next meet. So when you are planning for your attempts, it is both a science and an art form. And you can have the best laid plan going into the meet, and it could all change on meet day. Like, there's so many different variables that you need to consider. And a lot of them are, subjective. So a lot of them could be like how the lifter is actually feeling, what the competition is lifting. Do we need to pull back a little bit in order to hit that third attempt or not bomb out? Do we need to push forward a little bit more in order to, get that first place win or get that best lifter award? So it really just all depends on what the objective and the goal of the lifter really is. So once you and your coach have figured out what the goal of the meet is, it's now time to start creating that plan of action. So during your meet prep process, usually about 30 to 40 days out from your meet, you're going to figure out what your 1 rep max is. You can do this one of two ways. You can either attempt your 1 rep max, or you can do a 3 rep max, and then your coach can calculate what your estimated 1 rep max would be. Usually for a newer lifter, I will have them attempt their 1 rep max. If it's a more seasoned lifter, I will go off of the 3 rep max and then calculate it. So from there, whatever that 1 rep max number is, you're going to use that as a baseline for your attempts. So when calculating your first attempt, you need to keep a couple things in mind. Your first attempt is going to set the tone for your following 2 attempts. Okay. And if it's your first attempt squat, which is the very first lift you're going to do, it's going to set the tone for the entire meet. So you want to make sure that that number is something that you're guaranteed to hit, even on a bad lifting day. So for most lifters, I usually start them out right around 90% of their 1 rep max. Some lifters I'll push up to 92, but for the most part, we'll stay around that 90 range. And you want to make sure that you're I don't want to say you're conservative, but you just want to be aware of what that first attempt is, because once you hit that first attempt, you cannot do anything lower after that. So if you bomb your first attempt, you have to either attempt that number again or go up. You have no option to go down. So again, it's the lift that's going to set the tone. So you want to be very careful with your opener. It is meant to get you comfortable on the platform, get that first rep jitters out, and really set the tone for the rest of the meet. So as we go into the second attempt, in my opinion, the second attempt is the most crucial attempt of all 3. And some people will argue and say, no, it's the third. Here's why I think it's the second. For most lifters, when they're attempting their third, they're usually hitting 100+%. And we'll get into how we calculate that in a second. But unless your goal is to just hit a qualifying total and you don't need to hit over 100%, you're probably going to be safe on that third attempt and you don't really need to worry about it. However, if you do need to hit 100+% on your third and you're attempting weight you've never moved before, the odds of you missing that lift significantly increase. And if you do miss your third attempt, your second attempt is going to be the number that is going to get counted towards your total. Now, we want that number to still allow us to achieve our goal of the meet. So if that's to get best lifter, if that's to get, first place within your weight class, whatever that is, we want to make sure that we can still pick up if we need to. So with that second attempt, we're usually going to go right around 97% of that one rep max. So that is still almost a guarantee that that lifter is going to hit that number. Sometimes things happen and they just don't. But most of the time they do. So in my experience with the athletes that I've coached through meets, that 97% is still safe, but still a very competitive total number if it goes towards the total because we missed the third. So right around that 97% is kind of the sweet spot for most people. Now, there could be situations where that lifter is just feeling really freaking good that day and lifting conditions are perfect and all of the pieces are lining up. We may push our second attempt up to 98, 99%. It really just depends on the lifter, but typically that 97% is what I would recommend for that second attempt. So as you go into your third attempt, this is where this entire process becomes less of a science and more of an art form. You or your coach should have your third attempt already planned out. However, depending on the way that meet has gone and what the first two attempts looked like, you can either stick the course and stay with the plan you originally created because it still makes sense, but it very well could not make sense. And you could scratch the entire thing and go a completely different direction. There's a few different things that you would want to take into consideration to go a completely different direction. One would be, how did the first two attempts go? On that second attempt, was that 97, 98%? Was it a huge struggle or did the bar fly? Did they have, very clear sticking points that they may not be able to push through if the weight got significantly heavier? Did they get a red light on a lift? Even if it was just one red light and the lift was still considered good, it is really important to find out why you got red lighted. And the refs will always tell you why they red lighted you. But as the weight gets heavier, whatever that issue was, you need to be aware of it because it's going to be harder to correct once the weight does get heavier. So you need to be hyper aware of that so you can pay attention to it as you're going into your lockout. So on a deadlift, for example, if you get one red light for soft knees, that judge is going to look for that same thing again. So you want to make sure that you are accentuating that lockout to make sure that you don't do it on both sides and get two red lights and not get your lift. So those are all things to consider when you're going into that third attempt. You also need to really analyze where your competition is. Depending on where you fall within your flight, you can see what your competitors have put for their third attempt. So you really want to be very strategic with that third attempt. So if your goal is to win your weight class, you need to make sure whatever third attempt you are going for is going to give you a total that's going to put you ahead of the competition. If you are too far from it and it's not realistic for you to achieve that number anymore, just go for a solid PR. That's totally fine. If for some reason you feel like, it's on bench and you just don't have the energy for a third bench and you want to save it for a solid deadlift, you can even scratch your third attempt. I've had to do that with a couple athletes before. I've had to do that with myself. It's completely okay to have that be your new strategy if it's going to benefit you in the long run. So typically when you're calculating your third attempts, you want to go for about 104% of your one rep max. The only time I would recommend going lower is on bench. Anytime I have tried to put a lifter at 104% on bench, it usually doesn't work out. I would suggest right around 102% of your one rep max for bench, just because that lift is very difficult to tack weight onto. Now on a deadlift, for example, it's very easy to add 4% onto your one rep max, especially in those types of lifting conditions. So for the squat and the deadlift, I'd recommend 104%. For the bench, drop that down to about 102. Again, if your lifter is feeling really good and that 97% just flew on bench, maybe you can push it a little bit, especially if you have a little bit of wiggle room in your total, to have that second attempt go towards your total and have the opportunity to risk that third attempt, and then go ahead and do it. But you really need to be paying attention to where you are in relation to your competitors and be very strategic when it comes to that third attempt. So the key things to remember here, you have to have a plan going into your meet. And that plan is going to include your goal for the meet and then your strategy to achieve that goal, which will be your attempts. You want to have an outline as to what your first, second, and third attempt is going to be for each lift. And then you also need to know that you may have to scratch that entire game plan and go a completely different direction. So it's really important that you are able to think on the fly and your coach is able to think on the fly. If you are not working with a coach, I highly recommend hiring a handler for your meet day. There are so many things that go on a meet day. And you, as the athlete, the only thing that you need to be focusing on is walking up to the platform, moving the bar, and hitting your goals. That's the only thing you should be concerned about. You should not need to worry about what your warm up progression should be. You should not have to worry about calculating where everyone else's total is falling. You should not have to worry about giving your numbers to the judges. Those are things that you shouldn't have to worry about. And even as an experienced lifter, I still recommend hiring a handler. That way they can take care of all of that for you. And all you need to focus on is what your objective of the day is, which is to perform at your best. Another thing that I would recommend, if you have the opportunity to check out the venue for the meet ahead of time, that will also give you a really good idea of what type of conditions you're lifting in. So a lot of powerlifting gyms are, repurposed warehouses that, don't have air conditioning, they don't have heat, they don't have all of these other amenities that a standard like big box gym will say would have. So you need to make sure that you're taking all of that into account when you're planning for your meet day. If it is the middle of summer and there's no air conditioning in there, it's going to be hot as hell. And that may not be the condition you're used to training in. So you need to take that into consideration. If it's the middle of winter and they don't have heat, you need to take that into consideration as well. You also need to, think about, do they have source of water on site that you can refill a water bottle? If not, you need to make sure that you bring enough water for the day or enough Gatorade or whatever you're using to hydrate. Those are all things that you need to plan for in advance. So, the final piece of advice that I'm going to give you today, as it relates to developing your meet attempts and developing your meet day strategy, is taking into consideration the type of equipment that you're going to be lifting with the day of the meet. I will say this, if you are wanting to really progress in your powerlifting career, I highly recommend joining a powerlifting gym or a strength based gym of some sort. The equipment that you use the day of the meet needs to be the equipment that you're training on, and commercial gyms just don't have regulation equipment. So lifting at a powerlifting gym, you're going to have access to the same types of equipment that you're going to be lifting the day of the meet. So a regulation bench, for example, is significantly different than just utilizing a standard bench at a commercial gym. When you deadlift with a deadlift bar, it feels completely different than just deadlifting with a standard bar. It is longer and then it's skinnier, and the weight distribution is very different. And when you go to lift with a deadlift bar, there's so much more slack in the bar compared to a standard bar that you're going to have a ton of movement in the bar itself before the plates ever come off the ground. And that significantly changes the way that weight feels when you're going to lift it, especially when it's the first time. And you do not want the first time that you're picking up weight that's distributed that way to be the day of the meet, because it's just not going to work out very well for you. So if you have been lifting in a commercial gym and you're going into your first meet, take that into account when you are developing your attempts. You might need to be a little bit more conservative on that first attempt because you're unfamiliar with those types of lifting conditions. And if you've listened to episodes of mine in the past, you've heard me say this a million times. You want to make sure that your training conditions mirror as closely as possible the conditions that you're going to be lifting in at the meet. And one of the big ones is the type of equipment that you train with. So you want to make sure that that's as consistent as possible. So I hope you found value out of today's episode, and I hope this kind of clarifies how to actually go into a meet and create your strategy and figure out what attempts are going to be best for you. If you need any help as far as handling services or coaching services, please click the Join My Program link and schedule yourself a call. And if you did find value in this, please subscribe and share with your fellow lifters. And I will talk to you on the next episode on Wednesday.